chat with me, but I think this looks good. All right, can everybody just see my screen? I can't see you, so I'm going to have to rely on some of you to speak up for some of them perhaps. As I said earlier, my name is Toltu Tufa. I'm a psychologist. I work with Cathartic Consulting, and I've done a lot of work with all of your organisations in the last few months. So I may be a familiar face to some of you more so than others. I'd like to acknowledge that, well, at least for myself, I'm standing on acknowledge that I'm standing on the land of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and I'd like to recognise them as the first Australians and traditional owners of the land, and to also acknowledge and respect their continuing connection to both culture and country. So welcome everyone. Self-care. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I find that we're working in really trying times in 2022. I think if someone said to you, where do you see yourself in 10 years' time? Back in 2012, no one would have anticipated where we are today. So although we're facing new uncertainties, they're not really unfamiliar. They affect all aspects of our lives. And I think that's why it's more important now than ever to really consider the toll that's being placed on our well-being by so many factors and the implications for our mental health in terms of our lives. We didn't plan for things to go certain ways, and it's okay to feel a range of emotions. Some of them may be more uncomfortable than others, particularly when they go for a long period of time. So the plan for today is to explore the definition and the trigger points for self-care. When do you think you might need the self-care? And to have a look at what is it that stops us from doing the self-care that we all know about? I'm guessing there are majority of you would be either healthcare practitioners or, in the community health setting. So most of you would be very familiar with, self-care. It's something you probably tell your clients all about and even teach them to do. So why might it be difficult for yourself to start practicing that too? And then we might go through some really practical strategies. I find that in 1 hour, I'm going to give you a whole lot of things. I'm just going to kind of throw everything and keep it really practical, things you can do to help, renew or increase your pool of resilience. And I always like to use the chat box function, partly because I feel like I'm talking to myself for an hour and I'm going to avoid that. So if you can share your answers with the group, that would be ideal. And we can do a really good practice right now. So I'm thinking about, there's a number of you here that I can see in terms of participant attendance, but you might want to type in the chat box, maybe either pick an emotion, I've put some inspiration for you, or even, the type of energy that you might be bringing into this space today. Where's everyone at? How's everyone feeling? It'd be good for me to know as well, because that will help me to pitch accordingly. So I'm going to quickly step out of this and have a look at some of your responses, which unfortunately, there we go. All right, so I'm going to have a look at some of the responses here. What have we got? Everyone in the chat space. Okay, optimistic, tired, relaxed. We've got emojis, smiley faces. Okay, good to know. Some people feeling a bit anxious. So we're getting like a real variety of responses. I think a real spectrum. Actually, I don't even like using the word spectrum because it assumes one's good, one's bad. But I think it's more like a Venn diagram. So definitely coming back, most people may have probably felt, I'm going to be so excited when COVID's over and I get back to work, and instead you've turned up and you've just got more work to do. People are expecting you to pump out more work as though COVID never existed. You've got all of these people who are trying to get to the start of the line, and here you are in the middle trying to make it all work. So thank you for all the responses. They're looking really good. I appreciate that. Did someone want to share something, or I might get you to hold off just for now? So I'll go back to my presentation slide. So given that we've got a range of emotions happening in this group at the moment, it would be I think a good place to start is always to start with a definition, to make sure that we're talking about the same thing when we talk about self-care. So self-care can be defined in a variety of different ways. I think for the purposes of our presentation, though, it's important for us to recognize self-care as activities that we practice, activities and practices that we do that are deliberate, that we do on a regular basis, and that we do it in order to maintain and improve our health and well-being. So if you were to do a stock take right now of your life on how much self-care you participate, this would be a really good criteria to measure up. Is it deliberate? Do you do it consciously? Do you do it regularly? And is it helping to maintain or improve your health and your well-being? The second part or dimension of self-care is recognizing there's lots of different ways of going about it. So self-care can be psychological, emotional, physical, social, and often people don't talk about spiritual. And so spiritual self-care can also be quite significant in terms of helping people with their emotions of faith or feeling hope. And so and also spirituality, I think, is not necessarily organized religion. It can also be just being in touch with your spiritual self, with Mother Nature, with the world, with the environment, and that sort of element as well. The idea is that these practices or these activities we do will increase our resilience. Our resilience meaning our ability to just, get back into things again. And often we do these practices to minimize the impact of stress and distress. So you might, if you've ever participated in some sessions with me, you'd find that I often talk about things called buffers. Self-care practices are buffers to help us that when, in the situation you do fall over, these are the things that keep you padded and sort of reduce the impact of the stresses that are happening in your life. So one other thing which is very important, is that often when we talk about self-care, it starts with the word self. And so there's this assumption that it's all on you to look after yourself. Whereas the reality is we need to acknowledge that sometimes, yes, we do need to take care of ourselves, but the reason is not necessarily because of, our inadequacies or problems that are individualized to us. We're living in like a global era where we've just come out of, we've come out of droughts, we've come out of bushfires, we've gone into pandemic mode. We've had that for, a number of years, and that's impacted things like our families, our responsibilities, whether we even have a job or not. The way we do our work has completely changed. So I think, at least in this space, I wanted to acknowledge that as important as self-care is, sometimes there are things that are out of our control that we just need to acknowledge, that we're all just trying to swim. I think it's an important acknowledgement before we jump straight into what can I do to look after myself. So when we talk about self-care, I think sometimes I find it easy to go the other way around. So we look about self-care being response to stressful times of our lives. And so it's important, or it's actually helpful to know at what point your self-care might need to kick in, because some people often they reach their, this is putting it politely, but it's like you reach your wit's end and then you look for self-care. And so it might be worth looking at things from a much more, I guess, taking a step back and having a look at which one of these behaviors you might be engaging with in your life. Now, these are not always helpful behaviors. These are signs that we're not coping, signs that things are really hard for us, signs that, what we have within our capacity is not enough to handle these really big emotions that are happening for us, or behaviors that are happening over a long period of time. That's why I don't get people to put in the chat box which one of these you're experiencing, because I want it to be a personal reflection. And so some of them may be more relevant to you than others. And so this is what it might look like in your personal life. The question is, what about at work? How this can manifest in, if you go back to these emotions here, how it looks like at work could be, a myriad of different types of behaviors that you might engage in. And so you can see here there's like lots of different manifestations, I guess, of how of how it all how it looks like. And so again, part of this experience is just to give you permission to normalize that this is what it might look like for you, might look like it for those around you as well. And so it's funny because I'm sure a lot of you might be looking at this thinking, tick, 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 tick. Yes, I do lots of these different activities. So I guess the question I have, or what I'd like to hear from you, and I'm going to throw over to you in a moment, so feel free to write in the chat box because I'm going to pull down the presentation in a second. But I'm interested to know, what is it that makes it difficult for you to engage in that self-care? If you know that you're, engaging in behaviors maybe in your personal life and at work that you think, you know what, the tank is running pretty low. I know I need to take some time out. What is it that's making it particularly difficult for you? So I'll just give you a minute because I do plan to give you some strategies. Bring this back up. Okay. All right, so we're seeing lots of different comments coming up, and I'll just give some more time for some more responses just to see the themes, but I guess everyone's reading them too. What's standing out to me is that time. I don't have enough time, don't have enough pressure, not prioritizing myself. So I'm going to actually write these down as well because I'm going to come back and revisit these. So time seems to be the big one. Not enough money. Time/pressure. I'm guessing, so some people have written, someone's written time pressure. I'm guessing it's like time pressure to get things done. Okay, yep. Feeling that I don't have time. Organizational. Okay, so the pressure can be organizational or time. Okay, the need to hold space for others. Okay, too many demands. The too many demands response seems to me like, where am I going to put my focus? That seems to be the question. If you've got so many demands, which one are you going to, okay, Emily's spoken about prioritizing. Yep. So that, again, procrastination is another one. Okay, tunnel vision, not taking a moment to just stop and think about how we're doing things. I think this most recent response here is particularly interesting because quite often when we're in moments of stress, we have very, no matter how big your capacity for stress is, so if you think about your bucket of stress and your absolute capacity to handle any problems in the world, your stress levels eventually build up to a while, and you get to a point that once your stress levels are so high and your capacity for stress is so minimized, often you try and use that minimal energy that you're saying, this is all I've got left and I'm going to give everything I've got to solve this problem. So this problem better get solved. Nowhere in there is anything about self-care. Nowhere in there is there pausing and taking a step back. So with all of these barriers, how can we actually break through each one of them? Yeah, I'm seeing here overwhelmed. I'm so overwhelmed, I don't even know where to begin. And I appreciate everyone's openness and honesty because, again, these responses really reflect a lot of what I've been hearing as well. So I'll take it back to our presentation and have a look at, what do you do? What can you do? Hang on, there we go. Use the slideshow. I think the first step, that second picture is me. That is me reincarnated when I'm feeling like I need self-care. And I think, hang on, there we go. So the strategies for self-care, it's when you have all of these time barriers, and I'm going to work through a few of these barriers personally with you during this session. I think the first step to any kind of self-care is to build a sense of awareness before you consider any type of balance that allows you any kind of connection. So it's like the ABC strategy for self-care. And the first place to start with is awareness. Unless we're bringing your attention to what the issues are, your attention to what's available to you, how is it that you can make that choice, particularly if you're feeling quite overwhelmed that you don't even know where to look. You're not aware, you're sort of going through that tunnel vision process. So, hang on. There we go. So the first thing is that recognizing, your needs for self-care are valid. And I found this, now it looks very fancy, but I thought it was a really good picture for describing how we might be feeling over, the last couple of years. So I've put, on the x-axis, the emotional high, lows and highs. And so you think about us pre-COVID, they're warning us, there was, big changes about to happen. And our our emotions were probably somewhere around the middle. And it's interesting that when impact actually hits, generally people tend to get on really emotional highs. People are putting all their energy in, trying to resolve everything. That's where everyone's practicing their self-care, doing everything they absolutely can. Maybe you might remember this person. This person was probably in lockdown number 1 over here, feeling like, yep, I'm going to try and implement and do everything that I possibly can. And what happens after a while is that the more and more it goes on, often people start to drop in terms of their emotional capacity, right? And they feel what we call a sense of disillusionment. What's the point of trying? How can we, why am I bothering? This is too hard. I haven't got time. These are when all the barriers kick in, because you can look, if you look at the x-axis, this is time. So, this disillusionment period will happen if the time is long and the impact continues to stay. And so what happens is we often, at some point, they say, oh, look, everything is going to get better now, and things start to look like they're getting better. So this would be, I guess, when COVID restrictions started lifting, people felt all excited, and then the reality of it hit you. Oh, hang on a minute. I've got a lot of things to do. It's not as easy as I thought it was. And then we spend time working through that. Some call it grief, some call it, there's lots of different names for it, but I guess grief would be the most encompassing idea of just coming to terms with this new life that you're living. And it will eventually take time before you reconstruct a new beginning. And so we're in that phase now of that reconstruction. That's where we are. So some of us might be here, some of us might be up there. And I think we need to give space for wherever you are on this diagram, that your need for self-care is valid. Even if you say, I haven't got time, I haven't got this, it's all reasons why you can't do it. They're absolutely valid. And if we're going to start somewhere, perhaps we can start from here right now. The other way is, some people like looking at it as overall pictures. There is a scale called the perceived stress scale. This might be a good one if you want to know, is it just me? Am I just stressed, or am I just imagining it, or something like that? It's a quick inventory. You can look it up online. It's called the PSS. It's self-administered. There's 10 items where you answer them from 0 to 4. And the scores are used to determine low stress, moderate stress, and high perceived stress. So this is not this is different to other screening tools like the DASS, which is the depression, anxiety, and stress scale. This relates to your perception and how you feel. Again, this is not a sort of this is not like a medical sort of a psychometric test. It's a screen, and it's a self-report. So this might be a good idea just to give you a bit of an inkling in terms of where are you at, and something that you might want to possibly consider. The other part about awareness often is that, we're living in a space where actually the things that we're doing is stressful. And so when you look at the community work that you're involved in, the clients that you're engaging with, the manager who's got so many KPIs to meet, and then you're working with them, trying to make everything together. Perhaps you're not kicking all those goals that you imagined. Sometimes it's important to take that step back and recognize that actually this entire few years is going to be a stressful time. Because if we have the mindset that we need to keep going, eventually we end up in burnout. And so each one of you are far too valuable to have you burnt out, which is why taking that step back and creating that acknowledgement is going to be really important. What does that look like? It looks like giving yourself permission to have a reaction. To remember that despite as difficult as this all is, you certainly bring strengths to the table. There are a lot of people, and if we go all the way back to when you first got this job, there was a group of people who decided you would be the best for the role. They didn't think, oh, you can only do this role in non-stressful times. They thought you're the whole package. So you definitely bring strengths to the table, even if they're not necessarily at the forefront at this point in time. And if your strength is merely your awareness, then that's a strength that can be worked, that can be acknowledged and worked on. The other part is recognizing that, your strategies what worked for you last time may not work for you this time. And so you might, box breathing might have worked for you amazingly, whereas now you need to actually go out and do exercise and movement. Every single person has a different formula. And if yours is not working right now, it's time for a change. And I'm going to talk about how to change that in just a moment. And the final part of this is you may do the PSS, the perceived stress scale, and be like, oh dear, I really am stressed out. And so it is normal to feel low and kind of difficult to pick up because of all your resources have been drained for so long. So in terms of attuning your awareness, and again, so we talk about developing your awareness to create a balance and have some kind of connection to develop your self-care. Some specific strategies I find is quite helpful. I call it morning pages. And so one way of doing this is to write half a page of thoughts that come to mind every morning. So you may actually get a sheet of paper and you might, as soon as you wake up, start writing. You might come to work and before you check your emails, before you open up anything, just open up a Word document and just start typing. And the goal is just to fill the page, half a page. You can even cheat and put it on font 16 if you need to. But the idea is that you're sort of allowing your stream of consciousness to sort of let every single thing out there so that you can go back and have a look at it. Because often what you're thinking in your head can be quite different to what comes out of your mouth and what comes out on paper. And so, utilizing your senses to acknowledge where you're at, this is a really good way of attuning your attention and your awareness as well to where you're at. The other suggested strategy is to actually give yourself that permission and say, you know what, I'm not feeling great. I'm not expecting you to do something about it. I'm not expecting you to react, but I'm looking for someone to hold space just to recognize that things are not going the way I'm expecting them to. And it's okay to feel, very happy about certain elements in your life and feel quite frustrated or disappointed by other elements, and to have both of those exist at the same time. The key to all of this, and I haven't underlined it, but it says, give yourself permission to judge, validate, recognize without judgment. This is the key. There's no point in saying, no, and I'll go back to some of those barriers, and I don't have space, and there's too many demands placed on me. Well, we need to just sort of put it out there. Yeah, you have too many demands on you. So let's just sit with that for a moment and just acknowledge you've got a lot of demands that are being made of you. Yeah, you are procrastinating, probably because you're stressed out. Probably because when you're stressed, you're looking for stress release. And the first way you do that is probably by avoidance. And so the moment you start avoiding things, all those stresses go away. And so your body says, we should do this more often. Let's just procrastinate everything. And then we're not stressed anymore until it gets to the point where you must do that. Otherwise, the stresses outweigh the consequences of procrastination. So without judgment is going to be the key. And also, if you're the type of person that likes to have, numbers and scales, and I want to be able to quantify this in some way, then a perceived stress scale might be a good way to approach it. Again, if the results concern you, then, seeking professional help might be important as well. And so that's available to you either through your workplace or even through myself. And my contact details are at the end, so you can contact me confidentially if there's something you'd like to talk about. So that's about awareness, right? So attuning our awareness. The second strategy for self-care is balance. So when we look at creating a balance, I think this is the thing, right? Often we say, oh, where's balance? There we go. We talk about balancing. And so I think people say, oh, yep, I'm doing my best at balancing. I'm not balancing at all. But essentially, we're asking you to do something like, imagine you're standing on one leg, you're putting all your weight on one leg. Everything needs to adjust. Your bones have to adjust, your muscles have to adjust. If your leg becomes, weak or fatigued, because now all of a sudden the balance is all on one leg, I'm wondering how many of you would be criticizing yourself for it. Probably not. You're just recognizing actually you're just standing on one leg, and that's why everything else is falling out of balance, if that makes sense. In your attempt to achieve balance, other things might come out of balance in that process. So I think that attitude might be a good way in terms of how we approach ourselves and our reactions to how we're trying to achieve balance in our own self-care strategies. So some things I've spoken about this in the previous session that I did, which is creating pivots towards your desired directions. Often people talk about goals like these, you know, when you want to attain balance, you need to meditate, you need to eat healthy, you need to exercise. And the reality is that if you're already exhausted, like if you could do that, you probably would. Like the idea is you're probably not doing that. So what is it we can do to get you in that direction? And I think pivoting is a lot more manageable for people. So it's not about saying, yes, you need to run towards this direction. It's about saying, hang on, what can we do to just move? Right? So if you're eating takeout every single meal every day of the week, so you might create a pivot by saying, okay, my choice of meals will be more healthier in terms of the takeaway that I get. I might have one day takeaway free. So we're pivoting in the right direction. If you think about, you know, your workload, and I'm going to talk about workload in a moment specifically as an example. You might pivot by saying, you know, instead of checking my emails every single hour, I might switch off my notification and check it 3 times in a day. Might check it in the morning, check it at 1 o'clock, and check it at 3 p.m. So every couple of hours, sure, you're responding to people, but you're not there like every single time where your attention is being pinged for something else. So it's about creating pivots towards your own desired direction. So I want you to take a minute to think about that. You know, what are some of your desired destinations? What are some areas that you might be able to create pivots in where you don't have that balance? The other one is to be purposeful with your focus, right? And I'm going to talk about that in more detail, and recognizing, you know, when you have your focus, there might be different areas. And so I spoke about the definition of self-care having lots of, you know, dimensions. And so there are clearly a lot of different ways that you can focus on where you want to, you know, place your attention. So you might, you know, there's psychological strategies, emotional strategies, physical strategies, social strategies, spiritual strategies as well. So I've written some suggestions for each of them that, again, because we're a big group of people, these are things that you might want to consider. These are generally quite simple. And if you've done them before, you might want to start doing them again. And it's not about saying, I need to go walking every day. It might be like, well, I just need to go outside and breathe air. I need to breathe fresh air every day at some point. And that's the pivot that you're doing. So in terms of their sort of more personal strategies, I found with a lot of people, time pressure seems to be a big one. How do you create that balance with your pressure of time, with your pressure of organizational demands? And so I'm going to suggest this. So this is called, it's a strategy called time boxing. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's a strategy that was, I think, there's been quite a few studies done by Harvard University, and they use this with all of, you know, quite high performing executives and professionals. And this is essentially how they organize their time. So everybody has their own private to-do lists, and then there are some people who have a to-do list of the to-do list, and then there's those who have multiple to-do lists. And so this might be a practical way of getting rid of those lists. So imagine you've got your list of things to do for the next month, the next week. You've got, I think the first thing you can do with your to-do list is to figure out in terms of time, how long each one of these are going to take. If you've got tasks for next week or next month, put them aside. Your time boxing is just for the day. So you begin your time boxing by, in this area where there's a brain dump, that's where you just put in everything that comes to mind that needs to be done. There we go. There we go. Start with the brain dump. Then I want you to prioritize between your important and your urgent task. And this is a really important distinction. Just because a task is urgent, it doesn't mean it's necessarily important. There are some things that are very important, but not necessarily urgent. If you've got a report due at the end of the week, not urgent, very important. You've got an urgent task, you need to get back to a client, not very important. They can wait another day or two. So when you do your brain dump, you need to prioritize what are the top 3 things that you want to get done. That if you say, you know what, if I do these 3 things, today was productive. And I'm going to suggest here that you become, you can be as lofty as you want with your aspirations, but the reality kicks in when you look at your today's schedule. And so you fit in those priorities into the schedule for the day. So it may be you only have 2 hours. Like I've put in these curly brackets here. So you can put in like meeting times, I don't know, whatever time you want. Let's work in reverse. Let's say you only have between 10 to 12 and you only have between 4 to 5. You only have 2 hours to get stuff done. You need to go back to your priorities and figure out, are you able to slot them into those times and actually give yourself the time to do that. So if you've said today's priorities is to finish off writing, all my case notes, I've got 7 of them to do, and you've only got 2 hours, we need to be a bit more realistic about your time boxing. If it's going to take you an hour for each one, so then maybe your priority should be to get just 2 done. And so the idea is you think, oh, no, but I need to get them all done. Yeah, that's right. But if we start small and celebrate those wins, you'll be able to create more time for your tomorrow's schedule in terms of your time boxing. So you block out your schedule to accommodate those priorities for the day and avoid multitasking. So often we say you start off doing one task and you jump to another, and all of a sudden you've got 5 open tasks. Like, you've got 17 tabs open in your brain and you don't really know where the music is coming from. So you're just so confused. And so that creates problems for yourself. So you go through deleting all these tabs in your brain and then you're going to have to start them up again. So I'm going to suggest that you've got your big time to-do list. Excuse me, just a moment. You've got this big to-do list. I suggest you do a brain dump for the day, pick what you need to do, and then allocate time to all of them. For everything else that's left on your to-do list, I suggest you allocate times to them and find practical times in your calendar, even if it's in your Outlook, to organise them. So that's in terms of balancing your work time. Now, in terms of your strategies for self-care, if you're able to be aware and validate and acknowledge without judgment where you're at and use the different strategies for awareness, so it might be through doing some screening, it might be by taking inventory of what your strategies are, and then you're looking to create a sense of balance in all the different dimensions of your work life or your personal life. The third one I'd like to talk about is connection. Now, in terms of connection, the most important thing for self-care is keeping to some kind of routine, right? So again, if you're working from home, then you might set your alarm to get up at the same time each day, have a shower, put your favorite clothes on, try and maintain a sense of routine. Often when we talk about disaster zones or places in the world where people have experienced pandemics and wars and things like that, one of the first things psychologists recommend is that routine is started. So you can go to a refugee camp in the Ukraine somewhere, for example, and I assure you the first thing they'll set up is schools for children. Even if it's in a place where there's no, they'll set up a place where people can regularly eat their food. They try and mimic a routine as much as possible because that's really important for behavioral activation and to stay connected and focused. And speaking of focus, there's so many options for you to do. There's options, and within those options, you have the opportunity to make a choice. But in between that is your ability to choose. And I think that's sometimes what we forget with the self-care. I'm under a lot of pressure. I haven't got time to hold space for others. I've got too many demands. I'm so hyper-focused and fixated on this thing, I can't look anywhere else. That all results from your choice. And sometimes we forget that and we think that it's everybody else who's pushing us in a certain direction. And so whether you choose to go with the grain or against the grain, you do have a choice on where you want to focus your connection. And so when we talk about connecting, it's important to connect with a positive emotional state, which sounds ironic, isn't it? When you're talking about self-care, it's likely that as a lot of people mentioned earlier, they're feeling exhausted, they're feeling tired. Where on earth are we going to bring this, physical exercise, positive attitudes? How does that even work? And there's a very strong relationship with physical movement and positive attitude and behaviors. So this is something I normally do on a whiteboard, but I'm going to attempt to do this on PowerPoint. So if you bear with me. So if you imagine just for a moment, it's very important that if you're going to change your focus in a way that connects and drives positivity when you just feel exhausted, tired, burnt out, and just completely over it, you need to have a result that you want to achieve. So let's think, for example, let's say there's a result you want to get done. You've got, I don't know, let me think. You've got a report that you need to have done, okay? So when you have something that you want to achieve, something that you're after, you're looking for, where's my mouse gone? There we go. You're looking for a certain result. So if you want to finish this report, let's say, by midday, you want to start a new project brief, you want to finish off your client notes, you need to have action, right? In fact, you're probably going to need new action because your old reactions are not really getting you those results. You need something that's new. So what you're doing before to get that result's not working, you need something new. And the most important thing is that recognizing, here's you. Oops. There we go. Often as people, when we're trying to get results, and the reality is that we are amazing. What we can do, what we're capable of doing is fantastic. What we will do though, especially when we're stressed out, is usually disappointing. And it's not disappointing because we're not capable, because most of us, especially those in this room, are probably very capable of achieving a result, whatever it is. But the disappointing behaviors that you engage in that really make you struggle to not quite get there is usually because of the result of an emotional state that's dominating you. Usually you're dominated by anxiety, disappointment, resentment, whatever it is. When you're overcome and dominated by these kinds of feelings, these will drive, your actions will be driven based on that. So if fear or anxiety is in the driver's seat, then your actions are going to be very, very, very different to the behaviors that you're going to show and exhibit if what you're doing is based on being, courageous or joyful or excited. So the most important key to change in ways that connect with your desired results is to change your actions. So if you want to change your actions, you need to change the emotional state you're in. So how do you change that? How do you go from fear and think of all of those difficult emotions that some of you mentioned at the beginning to optimism, courage and joy and excitement? Do you do that with like positive affirmations, told to be positive, it doesn't work. That sort of stuff doesn't work at that point in time because you're going to say, you know what, that's not true. You don't feel that way. So mentally telling yourself that doesn't drive new actions. But what will change, what will drive the new actions is the way we use our physical body. So if I think about this just for a moment now, I'm going to actually take this off because I want to speak to you. This might be better in person. Okay, so if everyone can see me. So if I was to black off my computer screen right now and introduce a depressed person into this room, and I told you, I have someone sitting here with me behind the camera and they're very depressed right now. And I want you to really quickly on the screen here, you can just type and tell me in the chat room, how would you describe their physical body? Can someone tell me what their posture would look like? I've got a depressed person who doesn't want to come in front of the camera. What's their posture?
Slouching.
Yep, so they might be slouching. What's their voice like? Is it high or low? Yep, looking down. What's their speed of speech? Yep, what is their breathing looking like? Where are they looking? Exactly. So their physical state will be slouched, looking down, hunched over, softly spoken, quiet. But if we decided to get that person really activated and we're like, you know what, we are going to do the opposite and we're going to do radically different things, we will activate radically different neural pathways, and those neural pathways will result in different actions. So often these behavioral activations, there are lots of studies, there are things that some people talk about, breathing. I like to personally, as a psychologist, I like to refer to what we call power positions. And so this is something, look, if you feel shy, you can turn your camera off, but I'd like you to practice where you are right now. So if you're feeling often that if your state, your emotional state will dominate your behavior and you want to change your behavior, then you need to change your emotional state. If your emotional state is in a negative place, a good way to do that is to start with physical activations. And so a power position would be literally, and you can do it from sitting in your chair, you put your hands on your hips, and you can stand up like kind of, I don't know, you call it like your Superman position sort of. You have your chest out, shoulders back, and you engage in deep breathing. And you do that for 2 minutes. Now, some of you are doing this whole, I've kind of got my hands out now. You got to have your Wonder Woman pose. You need your Superman pose. You need to really be out there, right? If you do this for 2 minutes, right, and 2 minutes is quite some time. Studies show that you will increase your levels of testosterone, both men and women. Your levels of cortisol will decrease, and we know cortisol is responsible for like all those negative feelings that you might be having, and you might be more likely to take action in places where fear or anger may have previously stopped you. And so the key to making those radical immediate changes to produce a certainty is to produce certainty to allow us to connect with those favorable actions. So think about the most worst case scenario, that depressed person who's sitting next to me that you can't see. What is the worst case scenario? You don't hand in the report. You get called into management. You're giving a written warning. You're about to lose your job. The moment you focus on that scenario, so if you go back to the picture that I was showing you, if you focus on it from that state of fear will drive your old behaviors, and it will get you the results that disappoint you. Your procrastination, your anxiety will drive your procrastinating behaviors. Trust me, you're not going to get anything done. And then what happens? You get disappointed. And then you say, see, this is what happens to you all the time. So the question is, how do we change that state? Change our focus. So the focus needs to be something, and this is something in particular you can do. Think about something right now that you're really, really proud of in your life. Think about something just for a moment. I'm going to slow down. That brings genuine pride. None of this sort of ego-driven, like, yeah, I think I did it. Think about something that really you feel proud of in your heart right now. I want you to just, for one moment, just focus on something. You can close your eyes if you want to, you don't have to. And I just want you to think about how it feels when you're really proud. Maybe when you bought your first home, maybe when your child achieved a milestone, maybe when you got a new job. And how do you breathe when you're proud? When you're feeling proud? And if you're a child, what happens to your expressions? What happens to your face when you become proud, when you feel pride? Not the ego-driven pride, but genuine, heartfelt pride. It shows on your face. And so, I mean, if you're feeling any of this, can you just type in 111 just so I know that if there are anyone practicing or if there are any results. If you're feeling nothing, you can do 222. That's fine as well. But I'd like to see ones and twos sort of where everyone's at. Where's the chat function? There we go. And so the idea is that I'm not saying this is going to change your entire life. What I am saying is that when you shift your focus, you shift your probabilities as well. Your focus, your feelings of pride or excitement, when they radically come from within you, then that's when those changes happen. So if I go back to the PowerPoint presentation, so if, we look at the results. Where's my slides? I'm about to, here we go, bring it up. Okay, there we go. Right, so you need new actions, and if they come from the fear and disappointment, you are not going to get what you're looking for. But if you can shift your focus to a space where you're feeling positive in that moment, then the key is your changed focus will likely change your result, whatever it is. if you say, you know what, I'm excited about getting this done because I'm capable and focused, and this is genuinely from within, not, oh, Tulsi told us we needed to change our focus. That is not radical. That is not anything radical whatsoever. You need to really accept it from within to change that focus, to drive those new behaviors, because your behaviors will be directly as a result of the emotional state you're in. Your emotional state is 100% influenced by your focus. So in terms of thinking about it that's as a person, right? But in terms of the workplace, there might be some practical things you're looking for, saying, Tulsi, this is all well and good, but the reality is I'm managing people, I'm dealing with people. There are some tips that I have for, I've written managers, because some of these are directed towards them. You know, maintaining regular catch-ups with your team is going to be really important as part of, you know, facilitating the self-care. And so looking out for signs of struggle, setting up one-on-one meetings with staff that you're concerned about, and to try and provide support both, you know, in and beyond the workplace, to keep an eye on your own mental health as well as those around you. And if you feel like you're not coping, to get professional advice. Now, I'm going to go back to the maintain regular catch-ups with your team. So there is catching up and there's catching up. So there's, hey, how you going? And then not wanting to hear the response. And then there's, actually, can I know how are things going with you? And give the directive to your staff members to tell you how they are feeling. They may or may not open up. The point is not getting them to open up. The point is to create a space that provides safety for them to open up. They may talk to you about problems that you cannot resolve, that, you know, that are organizational constraints. But what you can offer as a manager is validation and possibly ways to provide support to try and get things done, even if it's at the very least validation and acknowledgement. So I guess from all of this, because I'm conscious of time as well, I'm interested to know from everything that we've spoken about today, and I've spoken about a myriad of things, essentially a one-way monologue, which I'm not particularly comfortable with. But I'd like to know, you know, if there's anything that resonated with you in particular from today's session, or if there's a particular strategy you think you might implement next week. I'm being very particular. So what strategies do you think you might implement to support your own wellness? You know, is it just a revision? Is it of, you know, of what you're doing? Is it, you know, to be kinder to yourself, to acknowledge, to maybe take on one of those dimensions of self-care and focus on that a bit? I will open up to, it'd be good if you could type some things, because I'd love to reflect on some of them openly with you. And as you're doing that, I'd like to just summarize, you know, what we went through today. I like to summarize them as questions, because if you can answer these questions, then you probably understood the gist of what it is that we spoke about today. So, you know, do you understand the definitions and the dimensions of self-care? Understand what your personal or work-based trigger points might look like. Recognize, you know, the awareness and balance and connection, the ABCs to self-care, and consider the dimensions and practical barriers that exist for you when you're developing your own self-care strategies. And have you considered a revision of your current use of strategies for self-care in the workplace? So that brings me to the end of my presentation. So I've got here, so my details are here. I'm Tulsi Tufa. My email is here. You can screenshot this. You can send me an individual email if you need to. I think it's important to have this stuff here. You may find that after this, you might find that you're actually kind of tired. And often when we talk about mental health issues and we open up these spaces where people talk about feeling anxious and that sort of stuff and difficult feelings, it can tire you out. And so it's really important to give yourself that chance to allow your body to be tired and to allow yourself that space. So if you need a bit of an extra break after this, if, for example, for your morning tea, then I wouldn't be too hard on yourself in that particular circumstance. Now I'm going to bring it back to here. Okay, so I'm going to come back. All right, so we've got a few ones. So we've got behavioural activation, time boxing. It helped me to be told that it's normal to feel low after prolonged distress. 100%. I don't think we do that enough. Practicing morning pages, trying out the Superman posture. Thank you, Emily. That's, I've never given it that name, but yeah, that's a good one. the breathing exercises, get more physical activity, time boxing, improving your awareness strategies, the Superwoman pose, identifying work triggers, and developing strategies around them, shifting focus, shifts your probabilities. That's right. That's a Beck. I wish you all the best with that mantra. It's a good one to have. Karen, you're going to use the time boxing as well. Great. And morning pages. Okay, so there's a few different suggestions here. So what I'm going to suggest is to give yourself an opportunity, gift yourself the opportunity of doing that. You've been through a lot. I don't know who's told you this, who needs to tell you this, but I'm telling you this individually. You need to acknowledge that you've been through a lot and you need that space to be able to pick yourself up, even if it takes a while. The same way you'd speak to others who are your clients and you say, it's okay, take it easy, calm down. We need to shift that compassion towards ourselves and to do it without judgment, without shame, and without critique. So it says we've got 5 minutes left in our scheduled meeting time. I'm not one to usually do my presentation and walk off, but I think last time there was a link sent out for feedback. I'm not sure if a similar one will be sent out today. So Joanna, I might end on my part here because I'm always conscious of time. And so I want to thank everyone for attending today. You didn't have to. And so that was a choice that you made for yourself. And I want to acknowledge and appreciate that you've been doing something for you. So well done and all the best for today. And again, my name is Toltu Tufa from Cathartic Consulting.
Thank you very much, Toltu.